Jai Shri Krishna, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaste everybody, and I welcome you all to the 6 pillars of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Intellect Yoga Institute conducts broadly 2 types of programs. One is what we call the Applied Vedanta series. Many of you have attended the other programs. We've got Vedanta and critical thinking, Vedanta and entrepreneurship, leadership, innovation. There's the Practical Bhagavad Gita program. And the 6 pillars of Srimad Bhagavad Gita is designed to give you a very good perspective on the applied Vedanta side, while also talking about the spiritual side. So let me get started. There are quite a few slides, and I'm going to try and maintain a crisp pace. Don't worry if you don't understand some concept. The Q&A tends to be long, interesting, and unlimited. So we should be able to take as much time as is needed to answer the questions. Typically, I start with a top-down view. I give people a background about what is the Veda, what is the Vedanta, and then we get into the topic. So Vedanta represents the last part of all our Vedas, the fourth part of all 4 Vedas. Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Samaveda, Atharvana Veda. All of you know that. Vedas are considered to be Shruti, which is essentially heard and understood and passed on orally, and are considered to be apaurushaya, as in no author. So that's one of the beauties of Sanatana Dharma, is that the whole notion of patenting or patenting or individual credit or authoring was not taken very seriously. It was seen as one glorious continuum of output, amazing output that could be shared, consumed, and then lived. Mantras on the Vedas, the Rig Veda is poetry form, the Yajur is prosaic or prose, Sama is music, and for those of you who have not heard a recitation of Samaveda, you must make an effort, listen to it. Our Shastriya Sangeet, classical music, is derived from Samaveda, and it is just divine. Atharva Veda has got poetry and prose, both. Now, the first 3 parts of the Vedas are called Karma Kanda. So, Samhita, Brahmana, and Aranyakas are to do with chanting, rituals, the action-oriented aspects, whereas the Vedanta or the 4th Kanda is known as Jnana Kanda or Brahma Kanda. So, Vedanta itself, also known as Upanishads, major ones are 108. There are supposedly innumerable number of Upanishads. The major ones are 108. 10 have primacy across sampradayas, across Advaita, Advaita, and Visishta Advaita. All 3 major sampradayas considered tend to have primacy and are referred to systematically in terms of all the scriptures and references. Now, Vedanta, make no mistake about this, is a science. This is not a subjective view which is, an expression of a theory or a pure philosophy which is all about high thinking and not connected to practice. So praxis is very much part of Vedanta. And you'll realize more and more how Bhagavan himself urges karma or action. So it's got its own body of knowledge, taxonomy, technical terms, it's got a detailed vocabulary, it's got its structure. And in terms of being a science, it is essentially all science is evidence-based, and evidence is about experience. That's what Vedanta is. But the Srimad Bhagavad Gita brings out the Vedanta in all its glory. And we understand, and we realize through the Bhagavad Gita that the Vedanta and our Upanishads and hence our Vedas are essentially universal, timeless. They cut across cultures and geographic boundaries, and they cut across time. They're so fresh and current, and the Srimad Bhagavad Gita brings it out in a manner that you can actually realize how contextual and how relevant it is to our day to day. So there are two dimensions to the Bhagavad Gita. Now I've come up with this idea of 6 pillars to capture, to allow us to frame in a very cohesive, integrated way the pillars or the key facets of the Bhagavad Gita. But the scripture itself defines itself having 2 dimensions: the Yoga Shastra dimension and the Brahma Vidya dimension. The Yoga Shastra dimension is all about the self and how the self is able to fulfill its highest potential, living as we are today in this complex, dynamic world, in the current avatars that we've all arrived in this material microcosm. The Brahma Vidya deals with eternal truths. It deals with Brahman, essentially. And more about this as we go down. The bulk of the Applied Vedanta program focus on Yoga Shastra because it's all about applying the entire power of the scripture to fulfill our individual highest potential and the potential of the universe. Now, the Srimad Bhagavad Gita itself, very quickly, 18 chapters. It is part of the Mahabharata. One thing I always like to remark on is how our scriptures are dialogues. Like our Upanishads are dialogues. There is no one-way revelation, no one-way monologues. The Guru Shishya Parampara is all about having a debate whether Shishya is able to challenge the Guru, and Bhagavad Gita is no exception. Arjuna, just keeps going after Bhagavan, Shri Krishna, which is why there's 18 chapters. He doesn't let go. He wants to make sure he fully understands it. So that's the beauty of our Dharma, which is it's not about just absorbing whatever the Guru says blindly. There is an aspect of Shraddha, obviously, but one has to engage, question, debate, demonstrate curiosity, learn, apply, and then you start to have deeper and deeper faith or belief or Shraddha. So the emphasis on experience as reality, like I said, that's what makes it a science. It's not just, if it's a hypothesis, it has got to be acted upon. You experience it, that's evidence, then you say, great, this is working. Beautifully, the way the Gita expresses itself, or Bhagavan expresses for all our benefit, is the very first word is Dharma. Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre is how the Gita starts. The last word is Mama. It ends with Mama, which is mine. So if you think about it like that, SvaDharma is the essence or the core of what the Bhagavad Gita teaches us and what Bhagavan conveys. But there are so many aspects to it that we've got the 6 pillars as a consequence. Now, I use my programs often to correct distortions that I'm aware of, misconceptions that I know, and I try and, given the fact that we've inherited a very distorted history over time for various historical and political reasons, I try and use these programs to convey where there are obvious distortions. So it's very commonplace for Indians and Hindus to call our Itihasa mythology. We say we have mythologists in our country who are heralded and who are praised as very knowledgeable folks. Fundamentally, there is no word as myth or mythology in our literature or in Sanskritam. We've got, so Mahabharata and Ramayana are Itihasa, as it happened. So it's really history. We have Puranas, we have Shastras, we have Vedas, Vedanta, Vedangas, and so on. We don't have mythology or myths. So with that, let's come to the 6 pillars itself. The very first pillar, and you must have seen the program description. There are 6. You would have known what are the 6 pillars. So Dharma is the first one. Dharma is the essence of it all. Why is that? Let's talk about that. And before we jump into Dharma, again I'll step back and give you a macro picture, which, everything is contextual. It all comes together. It all fits together. So we'll first talk about Purushartha. What is Purushartha? Purusha here means Atma, not male. The Hindi word Purusha. Here it is Atmartha, which is why I've expressed this. Purushartha is the macro framework for a full life. The purpose of a Jivatma or an individual's life is governed by the Purushartha framework. It's basically Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. The six pillars will deal with all aspects of Purushartha. Usually the Applied Vedanta programs will deal with Dharma and Artha, but will not get into Moksha. Here we've got Bhakti Yoga as one of the pillars, so we'll be getting into Moksha as well. Right? So now we'll plunge into Dharma, but essentially it's the most incredible concept that is available, I would say universally from the standpoint of any philosophy or any idea. Now the Purushartha itself has got to be anchored in Jnana and Vijnana, knowledge and wisdom. This framework, if you think about it, is holistic. It deals with sustainability because when you look at all four aspects or facets of Purushartha, it's well balanced. And if you apply this to economic constructs, societal constructs, political constructs, institutional constructs, business constructs, and so on and so forth, it gets away from narrow pigeonhole definitions which have emerged from the West in terms of, you have to be a capitalist, you have to be socialist. And then within capitalism, they will say, I'm fiscally conservative, but I'm socially liberal. Then there's communism. And you created this notion of a right, left, liberal, conservative. All of these are suffering from one fundamental problem. Dharma is the missing piece. When you inject Dharma into a system, it transforms it, it changes it. It makes it real, it makes it wholesome, it makes it sustainable. So what Purushartha does is encourage a balanced life across dimensions and facets, like you can see. And interestingly, the emphasis changes. So it's like, you have a grid of 4 by 4. So the emphasis on Dharma will change depending on your ashrama, the kind of Dharma. What type of Dharma comes into play? The emphasis on Artha will change depending on your ashrama. So when you're in Grahastha ashrama, Artha is very vital, but Artha needs to be balanced by Dharma, and so on. So this is how it works. When you're sannyasa mode, the idea of Dharma heightens, Artha comes down, Kama is down, enjoyment is down, pleasures are down, but moksha is high. So if you take these 4 aspects of Purushartha and you put it in a matrix with ashrama, then you can see how it starts to play out in a very directed. It makes it real. It makes it it's an actionable insight. So let's now come into Dharma. This is one of one can spend an hour talking about Dharma and have a Q&A just on Dharma, on all aspects of Dharma. But let me give you a framework for you to start thinking about Dharma as well. So firstly, it's just the most powerful contribution of our scriptures. There's nothing like this that exists anywhere else. Even karma, there is, you will see it appearing in many philosophies and metaphysical ideas and so on. But Dharma, unbelievable. And the reason I'm waxing eloquent is that all of you should really take time and start thinking more and more about Dharma as you understand our scriptures and as you understand Sanatana Dharma and your own lives. Start thinking about Dharma very actively. Poorly understood, right? People use it in very limited ways, and I'll talk about that. But it's widely misunderstood. No equivalence, like I said, in any other language or philosophy. It's got a contextual, layered meaning, nuanced, yet very direct, very specific. And Hinduism, Hinduism is a name we've given our religion, which is not created by us. It's a foreign name. But because of our colonial history, we've inherited this idea of Hinduism. Hinduism is actually a distortion of the word Sindhu, and it then became Hinduism. It's actually Sanatana Dharma, eternal Dharma. That is what our religion is. So Dharma has a subjective and an objective understanding. So SvaDharma, which is our personal, individual Dharma, Paradharma is somebody else's Dharma at the subjective level. Then the principles of Dharma are objective. They can be applied depending on context and individual to situations and people. So it starts to become, it can be turned into a subjective idea, but Dharma lives subjectively and objectively. Then typically people have heard of Samanya Dharma and Vishesha Dharma. Samanya Dharma are general rules or ethical rules applied. Vishesha Dharma are the same rules which are, or different set of rules depending, applied in context. Vishesha is applied specially or specifically. Now when I say layered, what do I mean? Let's look at some of the layers. So let's, at a metaphysical level, which is all about existence or ontological, which is part of metaphysics, which is trying to define the existence of a thing. Dharma defines the essential quality of anything. So water's wetness is water's dharma. The capacity of fire to burn or the quality of fire to burn is the dharma of Agni or fire. Humans, our essential core is divine. Then there are societal level aspects of dharma, which is rules and ethics. And here the idea is to try and go beyond what is just legal to what is ethical. By the way, chapter 16 in the Bhagavad Gita describes ethics and rules very, very explicitly as well. So that is also the idea of dharma. A lot of people use dharma as saying, ethics are based on dharma and dharma governs the ethics. And that's exactly the idea, to try and, again, the Western framework is more and more legal, more and more defined by the notion of law and coded as such. Our philosophical, our civilizational background always brought in the idea of dharma that went beyond stated rules and stated ethics. So try and do the right thing. We talk about it as Shreyas as well, or Shreya in Sanskrit. There's a physical layer to dharma, which is the reason to exist. The reason for a tree, the raison d'etre as we say in French, the reason for a tree to exist is to provide its beneficence in terms of shade, fruit, leaves, and so on. Likewise, every living being has some function, and that function tends to go beyond serving itself, but it needs to serve the larger good of nature. So that at a physical level is the dharma of every living entity. Then the whole idea of duty, which is deeply embedded in the idea of dharma. So righteous conduct, beyond doing the right thing at a transactional level, there's a notion of righteous conduct which governs what we do. In concentric circles, how we take care of ourselves, our family, extended family, community, country, the universe. So the more expansive you think about dharma, the more is your impact. The more are you able to fulfill higher levels of, and seek out and fulfill higher levels of your own capacity to go more and more good in a dharmic way. So that's the powerful multi-faceted aspect of dharma as it can generate impact. So this is one place where it is superior to the ikigai idea, which comes from Japan, which talks about purpose. But dharma, like I said, you inject dharma into any concept, and you have created you've taken it to a different level of quality and impact, both. And again, dharma, SvaDharma does that versus ikigai. Then we have the idea of dharma which is linked to the varna itself, which again we'll talk about. So Shastra dharma, for instance, the dharma of a Kshatriya. And what does that mean? So that is a unique definition. You could call it like a Vishesha dharma, but it's defined by the particular varna as well. Now, if you go back to the root of dharma, and this is the beauty about Sanskritam as a language, every word itself can be broken down. It has a root. It's probably the only language I know where the name of the language itself means something. So dharma comes from the root word or the dhatu, as we say, dhr, which is that which upholds, protects, nurtures. So that, when you think about it, dharma, that very essential seminal seed level idea, you can see how it's got these multiple layers. It's like a flower with multiple petals emanating from that fruit, right? The idea of dharma. So the fact is, dharma upholds, protects, nurtures, but dharma itself needs to be protected. So we have a duty to dharma. So part of dharma is a duty to dharma itself. It's self-referential there. So we have a duty to fulfill. This is the macro element of dharma that we have to imbibe in our micro element of dharma, in our SvaDharma. We have a duty to dharma. So the dharmic ecosystem. So everybody who's contributing to dharma needs to be protected and nurtured as well. So there are teachers, there are Veda Pathshalas, there are various institutions, there are missions, temples, principles, there are sources of knowledge, there are artifacts of knowledge. Everything that is providing dharmic protection to us in turn needs to be protected. And that's again a phenomenally powerful phrase, dharmo rakshati rakshata. Those who protect dharma are protected. So it's a symbiotic relationship, synergistic as well. And that is why I said, every day you think about dharma. At some point, you will just uncover a different level of beauty in terms of how you can operate and how you can interpret and how you can transform and impact things. Here's one more amazing way to use dharma in the context of, everyone's talking sustainability. UN, there are development goals emanating, SDGs, 17 of them, I think, emanating from the United Nations. Nations are talking about sustainability. It's now called ESG, environment, social governance, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. People are going nuts. Last 10 years has seen almost like a wave of sustainability to try and correct for all the damage and the sins committed before that. But if you had dharma to begin with, you would have had the harmony and the balance right then and there. You would not be going ding dong ping pong. Your system would be harmonized at the level of the system itself. It would be systemic harmony. So what dharma does again is bring in, takes it from ESG, what they call the triple bottom line of planet, profit and purpose. Dharma brings in let me correct myself. Profits, planet, people are considered to be the triple bottom line. Dharma, in fact, this is something in Intellect Yoga Institute, we've created this framework called the 5P framework, which adds, because of the injection of dharma, we've added purpose and potential. So we've got a 5P framework for sustainable sustainability, not sustainability as a fad or a fashion. Again, my favorite thing to try and, sort of take on or tackle some myths and misconceptions. We have been saddled, sadly, with this limited, out of context idea of ahimsa paramo dharma. Yes, ahimsa paramo dharma. It is in context of an overall picture of what are your ethics and values and what is your dharma. But it doesn't mean that ahimsa becomes dominant to a point where we become weak. That is what has happened to us. What has happened to Hindus or followers of Sanatana Dharma. This very dangerous, it has happened over a few centuries. It has been hardened in the last, I would say, 100 years. And in fact, in chapter 16 in the Gita, Bhagavan himself, the very first virtue, what he says, the virtue of a daiva, which is divine individual, is abhayam. So he goes direct and says there should be no fear. And the entire Gita is all about not ahimsa, it's about himsa, but dharmic himsa. So somewhere down the line, this core aspect of dharma and its connection with himsa and ahimsa has been distorted. We have to defeat this, we have to bury this, or we have to contextualize it. But it can't continue the way it is. The other limited perspective of dharma is, dharma is just about if I just do my job honestly, I'm doing my dharma. It is a very limited interpretation. And it is not doing, what are you doing for dharma? So these are all lazy ideas that people have brought in to satisfy themselves and to cop out of true dharmic expectations or expectations of dharma on us as individuals. Dharma is only about praying, only about rituals. Now, a couple of generations before us was overly concerned with rituals. They lost sight of the fact that the Bhagavad Gita had to be learned and practiced. There's a revival going on right now. Dharma only means religion. It doesn't only mean religion. Then there are some people who will say, Sanatana Dharma is not a religion but a way of life. This is such abject nonsense. Sanatana Dharma is not only a religion, but it's also a way of life. Is the correct way to say it. By saying it is not a religion, we have hurt ourselves. And we've made fools of ourselves. So this is a very incorrect. So the reason I'm sharing all this is I hope people who participate in my programs and then take your own time. You don't have to take my word for it. Do your own analysis. And if you have the conviction, please go out and correct people. Because we have to create a movement here beyond us as individuals and our own knowledge. We owe it to Dharma. Dharmo rakshati rakshata. Then there's, for several years we used to hear this, especially among the Indian middle class, that simple living, high thinking, wealth was seen as bad. In fact, even 10 years ago when I was doing some advisory work with the Indian Institute of Science, I was hearing this idea that, we are an academic institution, we don't want to make any money. That has changed, by the way. But the idea that you are now making artha a sin is completely opposed to the idea of dharma. Artha has to be balanced by dharma. In fact, Kautilya goes as far as to say, Chanakya, in the Artha Shastra, Sukhasya moolam dharma, dharmasya moolam artha. So the root of happiness is dharma, because you cannot be harmoniously happy in a sustained way without dharma. But the root of dharma is artha. You cannot support, sustain, and ensure dharma is maintained and nurtured without artha. So artha is vital. Artha is economic material dimension. Many of you already know it, but I'm just touching about it. So material progress has to be glorified. Our entire civilization has glorified artha. Mahalakshmi, goddess of wealth. Mahalakshmi in the Visishtadvaita tradition is seen as practically Narayana cannot exist without Lakshmi. That's the symbolism and the implication, and that's the idea of dharma for us in terms of our God and Goddess. So, but artha must be controlled, must be channeled. So the idea of dharma artha is very important. So, as an example, I've co-founded and I've actually created the idea of a platform called Dharma Artha, which enables investing, early stage seed investing in ventures that are dharmic in nature. And through Intellect Yoga Institute, we've been able to create a framework to allow us to assess ventures, entrepreneurs, and also provide mentoring based on dharmic ideas. So Dharma Artha is key. Dharma balanced by Artha. Then of course the pursuit of Artha has got to be aligned with your SvaDharma and your Swabhava, which we will talk about. But the Artha by itself doesn't mean much. But when it's aligned with the right forces, then it has a phenomenal impact. So again, think about Dharma in the context of your Artha as well. So that's the first pillar, Dharma. Now we come to the second pillar, SvaDharma, the individual core. We've gone from the essence of it all, which is the macro, to an individual core of what is SvaDharma. Now, like I said, the very first word in the Gita is Dharma, last word is Mama. So, SvaDharma is a very core aspect of what the Bhagavad Gita and what Bhagavan explains. And think about it. Bhagavad Gita starts when Arjuna has a meltdown. And Arjuna has a crisis of SvaDharma. Essentially, his crisis, the reason he collapses and he has a breakdown, he's unable to function, he's paralyzed, is because he's essentially had a crisis of SvaDharma. And Bhagavan tackles that. By tackling SvaDharma, he is able to go across all aspects of our life, how we think, how we act, how we behave, the purpose, everything, because it all comes back to SvaDharma. So it starts off with that and then it becomes holistic, integrated, complete. Now what SvaDharma does, it incorporates a person's station in life. So SvaDharma is dynamic, and I'll explain this a little more. SvaDharma has to be seen not as a static concept, but as a dynamic, evolving concept, but which is anchored. Now, recognizing SvaDharma and following your SvaDharma, it is actually leading to the highest fulfillment of your potential. It's also the path for moksha. All these pillars are dealing with Yoga Shastra as well as with Brahma Vidya. Bhakti Yoga, of course, deals more with Brahma Vidya, but even these Yoga Shastra, Applied Vedanta ideas are all relevant for moksha. So following a SvaDharma itself puts you on a path. And Bhagavan is very clear. He says you cannot follow another's dharma. That is that's like sin. That's almost like Asura Rakshasa type behavior, following somebody else's dharma. Because it does a lot of damage to yourself and to people around you and to everything you touch and impact. Now, this is the again beautiful thing which I'm so in awe of. How, if you inject the idea of SvaDharma to sociological, psychological, behavioral aspects, you have solved all the toxicity of modern life. In one fell swoop, in one go, you are able to solve it. That's the power of the idea of Dharma and SvaDharma when it's brought in here. So civilizations need to embrace the idea of Dharma and imbibe the idea of SvaDharma, macro, micro, top down, bottom up. That makes it complete, makes it cohesive, it makes it actionable, and it makes it effective. That has to happen. And that's the key to restoring harmony, integration across institutions and societies. Rather than these extremes, the idea. So there's a Hegelian concept, right? The Western philosophy is based on this idea from a German philosopher, economist called Hegel, who came up with this thing that, all ideas are thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So you have to have an antithesis. You have to have friction against the primary idea, and then you synthesize it. The problem when you synthesize it is always creating compromises that don't hold. And that's exactly the root philosophical underpinning of Western thinking. Whereas if you replace that whole idea with Dharma, then you're doing away with all of this. So let's talk about SvaDharma. How do we get to SvaDharma? First, let's understand the idea of Svabhava, your individual bhava, inherent potential, your temperament. We are all born. When we come into this world, if you see two identical twins, they are different in their Svabhava. Their core personas are different. That's their nature. And people are always wondering how identical twins, but they're so different. They could be the same gender, but it doesn't matter. So that's what Svabhava is. And Bhagavad Gita explains it completely. How you arrive in this avatar, in this prarabdha, with a particular Svabhava is actually based on your vasanas and how the vasanas are transferred and how you're born into this particular avatar, the prarabdha of this avatar, the gunas that are represented are all coming. It's a continuum. It's beautiful. It explains it very clearly. So Svabhava, what is Svabhava? Svabhava is basically composed of gunas. So everyone's individual Svabhava is a combination of gunas. And it represents the kind of person you are. And those gunas will tend to have that, a level of agitation among it in the sense that we all have, we seem to have inherently some extreme likes and dislikes. I joke about it. My son, at the age of 1 year, he refused to eat curd rice. In my community, not having curd rice, what's going on here, right? But here's a child who rejected curd rice, and till this day he hates curd rice. So this raga dvesha, attachment and hate, things you like, things you dislike, come in inherently into the gunas as well. So let's dive into gunas a little more. Normally in my Applied Vedanta programs, I would only be talking about 3 gunas, which everybody knows. Sato guna, sattva, rajo guna, rajas, tamo guna, tamas. Now, that is the level of a jivatma. All of us are jivatmas. Every one of us as an individual is a mix of gunas. It's the composition that varies. So we are all a mix of the pure sato guna, capacity for deep learning, purity, doing good, dharmic in its essence, combined with passion, action orientation, the fire. That's what Rajas provides. And Tamoguna provides all the negative attributes, the envy, the laziness, the indolence, as we say, or the self-centeredness, and a very low level of self-awareness, or even a propensity or a motivation to become more aware of yourself, because it takes work to become aware of yourself. So Tamoguna, when it's concentrated, one tends to not be very aware. But we all are a mix. And part of getting to our SvaDharma is to understand our Swabhava. Part of understanding our Swabhava is to understand our gunas. What is the mix of our gunas? Now in this program, I've brought in another guna, which is not usually understood, or which is not usually there in the Applied Vedanta in Yoga Shastra. Shuddha Sattva is the guna that is actually part of Brahma Vidya. It's relating to Paramatma. So in Visishta Advaita, Narayana, so in Advaita we say Gunatit, Brahman, Paramatma is beyond gunas. But in Visishta Advaita, in Dvaita, we say that Narayana or Brahman or Paramatma is Shuddha Sattva, which is pure purity. Because at the Jivatma level, we say we could have a desire that is sattvic. So sattvic is pure. A desire to learn the Gita, for instance, is sattvic desire, but it's still a desire. It's emanating from a guna. But Bhagavan Paramatma is beyond that. So Shuddha Sattva, that's the idea. Now let's follow this thread to get to understand SvaDharma completely. SvaDharma, we talked about Swabhava. Swabhava, we talked about gunas. We talked about a mix of gunas. Now we'll come to how we, to make this really understandable, a Varna system, capture it. Varna, the meaning of Varna is color. Again, we never had this nonsense called caste system. The word caste comes from Portuguese castas. It is barely 200 years old. It is one more divide and rule device. The first census based on caste is barely 120 years old. No word like caste. We have Varna, we have Kula, we have Jati, then we have Sampradayas, we have Gotras, which cover different dimensions of it has birth, it has behaviors, which is Swabhava, it has geography, it has location, it has community, it has trade, it has family connections. There are multiple aspects by which we organized society. A lot of it was fixed, many of it was mobile. Varna is essentially mobile. It's not fixed. So we are born in a particular Varna, in a particular family, in a particular Kula or in a particular Jati, but your Varna is mobile. How is Varna defined? By your gunas, by your Swabhava. And then by the karma, so long as you align your karma with your Swabhava. So, a Brahmana Varna, you could be born a Brahmin, but if your dominant guna is not Sato Guna, you're not a Brahmin. So what is your dominant guna then? Are you dominated by Rajas? Is your Rajo Guna very high? That's the dominant guna with a certain amount of Sato Guna, because remember, Kshatriyas as leaders and kings are not self-centered. So they need to have a high level of Rajo Guna along with Sato Guna. The Brahmins tend to have very high level of Sato Guna, the ability then to really focus on doing good, on Dharma, and the capacity, like I said, to absorb knowledge and impart it without calculating the return for it. The belief of following your Dharma is very high among Brahmanas. It should be, right? But they have to have a certain amount of Rajas also. They're not pure Sato Guna, because they need a certain amount of passion that orients and generates that energy and action to be able to do their role as a Brahmana. Kshatriyas, like I said, leaders. We talk about, traditionally we say, warriors, but mainly leaders, kings, but you also need the warrior capacity. You need to have very high level of abhayam to be a Kshatriya. Dominant guna is Rajo Guna. The Vaishyas tend to have a mix of Rajo and Tamas, but low Sattva. So Vaishyas tend to be very focused. They're very active, but they tend to be more self-centered. They're less concerned about impact on the world. The idea of dharma doesn't go too many concentric circles. They tend to focus on making money, and making money sometimes can be an end in itself. Now, when you apply these varnas to people you know, right, it's very illuminating. The great framework to understand people and individuals from their primary role standpoint. You can use it to apply it to work and even to your personal social life. You can see people reflecting certain varnas. Now, Shudra tends to have a higher level of tamoguna and rajas, less satoguna, but they can be, very skilled people. They can create a lot of value, but it tends to be narrow focus. The Brahmana has the highest impact in terms of what he or she generates, followed by Kshatriya, followed by Vaishya, followed by the Shudra. So the level of impact tends to get narrower and narrower and more towards the self. So like I said, not only based on birth. You can be born, but if you don't have the svabhava, you can't hold that particular varna. You have to modulate, you have to shape it, and you have to then decide, given your level of, in your sadhana, you have to think about how you can shape your svabhava towards the varna. You can't transform. Some people have the capacity, but you can certainly modulate it, shape it, and you can move and grow. And we have a lot of history of people who were born in a particular varna who have absolutely moved on to other varnas. So varnas, when you look at varna and SvaDharma, you will understand now, and I'll talk about this. So varna defines, right? But what SvaDharma does is it brings in the idea of your ashrama station in life and gives it direction in terms of what you actually do. So Arjuna himself is a fantastic example, right? Arjuna's varna is a Kshatriya because he's a leader and a warrior. But in the context of Kurukshetra, he has to be more of a warrior leader, more of a warrior than he is looking at as a governance leader. So that's where SvaDharma takes the varna and gives it specific direction and gives it and impels it into a particular direction in terms of a karma. So Arjuna, if he is now, in Kurukshetra, Kshatriya, if he starts to talk about governance, he'll fail. He has to wear the hat of a warrior leader. That's what we mean by modulating SvaDharma based on station in life. Now let's apply this to modern professions. This is one of the very interesting aspects of Applied Vedanta. People are able to apply to their work, careers, and are able to truly figure out how they can drive professional impact for themselves. Now, Brahmins are typically academics, they're scientists, they're natural advisors. See, advisors should not have conflicts of interest. So it's very important. They have to be natural givers. If they give advice that has got inherent conflicts or inherent other desires coming in, the advice will not be effective. It won't be pure. It will not really have that amount of knowledge embedded because it's already diluted and compromised. Kshatriya, leaders, CEO, politicians are supposed to be Kshatriyas, supposed to be leaders. Very difficult to find Kshatriya politicians. But I urge you, take this Varna template and assess the politicians that you know or that you think are leaders. Apply this and see, you'll find that 99% of the time they'll be different. So we think there are some leaders because they've got MBAs, that they'll be great leaders. But they don't have the svabhava, they don't have the varna of a Kshatriya. So you have to have that fire. Leadership is all about mettle. You have to have that ability to inspire people, to carry people with you. You take risks and people are able to take risks along with you. So as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, you're selling a vision. You're taking the risk. You're putting your money on the line. You're putting your reputation on the line. Many years of your life on the line. And there are people willing to follow you because they see the leadership mettle in you. That's what a Kshatriya does. And you will see a lot of people have the credentials and the qualifications of a leader but don't have the capacity or the svabhava of a leader. You don't have the Varna of a Kshatriya. They have Varna of a Vaishya, but they are operating as a Kshatriya. So use this as a way of really judging a lot of roles and positions and people other than yourself. Of course, the first thing is to judge yourself and assess yourself. Right? Kshatriya has to have a strong vision for other people as well. So in the context of Dharmartha, we look at the Kshatriya entrepreneur. We don't look at a Vaishya entrepreneur. Because if we are trying to come up with innovative ventures which have breakthroughs, then all the qualities of a Kshatriya are required in our entrepreneurial team. We can't have Vaishya trader type, business people type alone. We need that, but can't be led by that. That's the difference. So typical trading businesses are Vaishya. They will find all commodities, and even today our big e-commerce, Q-commerce, so-called startup boom is mostly trading businesses. There are very, very few Kshatriya type entrepreneurs. A lot of them are essentially Vaishya type entrepreneurs. We're calling it innovation, but it's mostly trading businesses that are happening. Low risk taking. Very, very careful. Even there's a lot of capital that's taking the risk, but the entrepreneurs themselves are not taking that much risk. Shudras tend to be doers, skill-based professions. They don't want risk, they don't want to deal, they don't want to change the world. They're not concerned. They want to do a great job of what they're doing. They don't want to become leaders. And the level of self-centeredness is there. I take the example of a surgeon who can be a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya or Shudra. A surgeon who's only concerned about being very, very skillful in terms of surgery and doesn't really worry about the medical profession or the impact of healthcare as a whole, but does a brilliant job as a surgeon and doesn't do anything else. It's a Shudra surgeon. The surgeon who wants to create a multiple practice so he or she can leverage herself or himself to generate more cash flow, more money for that surgery skill is bringing a Vaishya approach. The surgeon who says that I can now do something at scale, I can create a new idea, I can take some risk and bring some breakthroughs into this particular area of surgery, is a Kshatriya surgeon. Is now talking about leadership, wants to transform, wants to create impact, wants to make healthcare a better thing, has a vision that goes beyond the limited impact. A Kshatriya surgeon. A surgeon who's very concerned with the development of surgery, the idea is the knowledge, the research side of it, and who spends quite a bit of time contributing in research for the greater good of that particular area of surgery or healthcare is a Brahmin surgeon. So that's the way to think about how we look at Swabhava, Gunas and Varnas and the modern professions as well. Now let's come to Buddhi Yoga. Now Buddhi Yoga is, people don't talk about it much, but Buddhi Yoga is that very quiet concept that Bhagavan talks about in the Gita from time to time, which is actually very, very asymmetrically powerful because it's how to think. So if you think differently, you act differently. You act differently, your outcomes are different. The impact is different. So Buddhi Yoga is enormously powerful. It's the empowering side of Vedanta at an individual level. It empowers you because it is dealing with your individual buddhi. So I'll just talk about yoga briefly. There are different kinds of yogas. There's, Karma Yoga we have, it's one of the pillars, the path of selfless action. Jnana Yoga is covered under Bhakti Yoga here, and for good reason. You'll appreciate it when I talk about Bhakti Yoga as the pillar, which is the path of devotion. Buddhi Yoga is the path of discrimination, but it's acted through Karma Yoga. Hatha Yoga we are all familiar with. It's the body, mind, intellect practice, asanas, and Dhyana Yoga, which is one of the pillars, which is yogic meditation. There are other yogas as well, but these are the main ones so far as the Gita is concerned. Now, what is Buddhi? Now, everybody talks about mind. In the Western construct, there's mind matter. Then the Western psychologists tried to break it down as subconscious, unconscious. They call it the id, as it's written, the id. And the analysis that they look at consciousness, they're still figuring out consciousness. The way it is layered and stacked is a little different. And if you take that Western, what I call the software of the brain, right, which is the behavioral side, and you apply it, it has provided a lot of answers and we have seen the results of that. But if you take the Vedantic idea of the software of the brain, the mental apparatus, it is amazingly transformational, very empowering at an individual level. What is it? What's our software stack? At the highest level of subtlety and the highest level of consciousness and highest level of humanity is Chitta. So it's aware of very fine aspects of who we are. It captures memory, institutional memory of us as individuals, and it identifies as Atman because you're conscious of you being an Atman or a Jivatma. So in our Vedantic framework, Chitta is consciousness, awareness, and connected with Atman. Then you got something called the Buddhi, the seat of judgment. The English word closest equivalent is intellect. Like, many of our words don't have English because the English word is representing Western philosophy. We try and use many of the words, we try and combine some words to give it meaning. Buddhi is a seat of judgment and decision making and discrimination. Manas, the mind, what is known generally speaking as the mind, is basically a field of thoughts. If you just sit and you observe, you're thinking about all sorts of things. My guru in Chinmaya would call it like a monkey jumping from tree to tree. That's one of the analogies that Gurudev himself has used to talk about the mind. It's just a field of thoughts, good thoughts, bad thoughts, ugly thoughts. It's just coming and going. What is driving that? Why is it that when I am sitting quietly, I am thinking about a bunch of things which are very different from what you are thinking about? Because Vedanta explains to say these thoughts are emanating from your gunas. So it's all completely connected. It's all fully explained. So the gunas that you possess in your Swabhava are generating your mind, the field of your mind, the manas. And the ahankar is essentially the I-ness, the identifying everything with yourself. In English we say ego, but this goes far beyond ego. So, but it's also the source of creativity. Individual creativity comes from there. Again, it's being generated by your guna as well. It's possessive. You try and look at everything from your point of view. And that's what the ahankar is all the time doing. It's pushing itself all the time into the dominant notion of what you think reality should be. All reality is centered around yourself, and your sense of yourself is the template and filter to observe all reality. So it's very self-centered in that sense, right? So it brings out insecurity, you're competing with other people all the time. It's all coming from ahankar, right? It does not let you perceive unity among people. And that is something in Vedanta, it's very fundamental. We say everyone is equal, yet different. Now in the Western approach, they got it all very confused by saying everybody's equal. And everybody should be the same. So that's why you brought in this idea of diversity, equity, inclusion, to say that everybody should have opportunity to do the same thing. If not, they should be given that opportunity. Rather than saying everyone's equal, but everyone's different. Why don't you allow individuals to maximize their individual potential rather than putting a one-size-fits-all approach? That's the mistake that's being made, and we are seeing the boomerang effect of that right now. So we're all equal at the level of the jiva. But we're different at the level of the sharira. Because prakriti, which is the physical dimension, the material dimension, which is bringing us with gunas and our prarabdha and our karmas, is different. So our antakarana, the mental apparatus, is hence different. But we all have the buddhi. Knowing that you have the buddhi is like a master key. Once you think about your thinking capacity and your mind and your mental apparatus with the idea of buddhi, it's the master key. Because buddhi opens the door for Yoga Shastra, buddhi opens the door for Brahma Vidya, it opens the door for Jnana, it helps to open the door for Vijnana. So buddhi is like a master key. Think about it, and you have to try and see how to operate from the standpoint of the buddhi. Bhagavan himself says in chapter 10, Shloka 10, he says, there are a few things he says before that, but I give them the gift of buddhi yoga, the discriminatory path by which they reach me. So you have to, and he's all the time telling Arjuna to use his buddhi as well. How does the gift of buddhi yoga work? So what he says is he will light it up. So if you are able to do a few things, Bhagavan will ensure that your buddhi is invoked and your buddhi is empowered more and more. That's the power of karma. Karma works hand in hand with buddhi as well. Right? And buddhi helps to shape your karma, and karma in turn allows that buddhi to be invoked at a level you will not even be able to understand. It's happening on its own. You become an instrument. So compassion, Bhagavan's compassion lights up the antakarana. The buddhi is within the antakarana. In an epiphany, it just happens to destroy the darkness of ignorance. Because what ignorance and delusion is created by the manas, the agitated manas, the field of thoughts, and the ahankar that identifies and clings into everything, clings on to everything. Buddhi creates that, brings clarity and a sense of direction to the thinking otherwise that is happening at the level of the manas and ahankar. So I'll just run through this very quickly. You're familiar with this because you'll observe it. People with high ahankar, low self-esteem, they're always comparing themselves with other people because they are so bound to their individual, they're clinging on to that notion of I. They can't handle criticism. They will not accept mistakes. They have a hard time saying sorry. Dangerously, they're amenable to flattery. If somebody is amenable to flattery, then they can be bought. They are compromised people. It leads to feudal behavior because then people, suck up to you. You only support people who are so-called loyal to you. What does loyal mean? They praise me. They're yes people. I won't say yes men because it can also be women, right? They're slow to learn from other people. They don't listen very actively. They don't absorb. They don't give credit to other people. They will pretend like, it happens to me many times. Someone will ask me for my input on something, and when I give my input, they'll immediately say, oh yeah, I know this. And I spent 30 minutes talking to people who wanted my advice, being told continuously for 30 minutes that they knew everything I told them. So why bother, right? So this is all high ahankar. They don't learn, so they don't achieve much end of the day. They put down other people. They don't have empathy. You'll see all these characteristics. And I find in my programs, in the Q&A and later communication, how people struggle to understand where is this behavior coming from. And now that they know where this is coming from, can we tackle it? This is coming from a high level of ahankar, which has to be toned down. Seeking self-interest. They project whatever car they have is the best. The college that their child goes to is the best. The place they live in is the best. Everything they do is the best. So you'll see this among people with you. Relatives, neighbors, friends, colleagues, and so on. So they don't do very well in terms of even their varanas. They are suboptimal. They underperform. Likewise, if you see people with low ahankar, you can see them shining. They are not trying to project, I'm humble. See, we are India especially, we have participants from all over the world and from different nationalities. But, I see this particularly strong in India among Indians that we look up to this idea of humility. Say, oh, you're so humble. What do we know about the person being humble? It's all projected, right? So we get carried away by all of this stuff and people project it. So there's something called fake humility, there's something called real humility. So try and separate between people who are genuinely humble, who exude confidence, who are comfortable in their skin, who are not trying to project false personas, and who listen well, they're transparent, very happy to share credit. This is something which we all suffer from in our organizations and place of work. People take credit for what we do, and then we struggle, and then we come across as show-offs, right? We try and take credit. It's a real practical issue. One of the big things, which is a failure, which is increasing among the newer generations, and I see this very marked among Indians, because I've worked all over the world in different roles, mostly leadership roles, and I find Indians don't ask questions. Not asking questions like afraid that they may be seen as being ignorant. This is a sign of high ahankar, but being able to ask questions, accept criticism, learning from mistake, sharing the credit, carrying people along, and such people with low ahankar you will find make exceptionally good leaders, not supervisors or managers, exceptionally good leaders, and they are able to actually dramatically have an impact on other people without other people even recognizing it. But people will know by interacting with such people that they've gained so much, but it's not even being talked about. It's happening quietly and it's happening in a very sure way. Such leaders are highly inspirational, as we know. Now, the buddhi has to deal with the ahankar. Buddhi also has to deal with the manas. Right? So people who you can see these signs, or even for yourself, when your buddhi is in control of your manas, your analytical capability jumps. You're able to really unpack, you're able to go to a level of detail, you're able to apply yourself. The mind's not agitated, it's not jumping to conclusions. Clarity of thinking is high, thought process is less cluttered, and problem solving, you're able to bring a thoughtful approach. So observe yourself and see, and you can also use it to observe other people, but observe yourself. This is primarily to see how you can transform yourself as well. To see, is your buddhi operating? Once you put on the buddhi switch, then it changes the way you look at a certain scenario, a situation, information that's presented to you, any kind of information, whether it is personal, social, political, work, information that we are receiving all the time, how we interpret it, from where we are interpreting it, how we reach conclusions, how we make decisions. If you put on that switch, the buddhi switch, it starts to change things. And then you'll start to understand what's the right thing versus the thing which the mind has fed you as the right thing to do. The buddhi will change that perspective. You can look at what is really legal, you can say is it ethical, is that moral, all of that can start to get done. And then you'll go beyond transactional approaches, even at work. You'll start to take an institutional approach because the buddhi is dominating the thinking process and the decision-making process and the judgment process. It becomes more strategic. You cannot think strategically if you cannot think from your buddhi. And buddhi has to be, I do programs for corporates where if they have to go into a strategy session, like an offsite, before they do that, they need to have a dose of buddhi yoga. Because they will maximize the strategic output, strategic thinking, teamwork and output, if as a team and as a group they're able to unleash buddhi. It also expands critical thinking capacity. Critical thinking in Applied Vedanta, one of our programs is Vedanta and critical thinking. We talk about buddhi yoga. Critical thinking is defined by us in Intellect Yoga Institute as an intellectual process of pursuing and uncovering the truth. That's the object. You have to pursue truth, which requires buddhi yoga at its core. And hence it's applicable for Yoga Shastra as well as for Brahma Vidya. In Brahma Vidya also, when we are on the path of moksha, we're looking for truth. That's why Bhagavan has made buddhi yoga so inherent and so fundamental to the Gita and to all of us who are Arjunas. So what's the idea of buddhi yoga? Make intellect your anchor. Observe, manage the manas as well as the ahankar. Critical thinking gets unlocked. Decision making is superior. You are starting to differentiate between perception and reality. Buddhi enables dhyana and moksha, like I said, essential for Yoga Shastra and Brahma Vidya, in short. Now, we are moving, we've come from SvaDharma, Dharma, SvaDharma. We've looked at buddhi, which is how to think, to how to act, which is what Karma Yoga is all about. So let me talk about karmas, because this is a very fundamental idea that people have, by and large, a limited view on. We all talk about karma as action, acting, but let's unpack it a little bit. Fundamentally, karma is a multidimensional concept. After dharma comes karma in terms of its enormity of nuance and meaning. What is sanchita karma? Sanchita karma is a cumulative accumulation of all our karmas, past, present, and future. The blueprint of our lives is captured in Sanchita karma. Then what is Prarabdha karma? Prarabdha karma is that part of this cumulative Sanchita karma that is applicable to this particular lifetime as we are born. The current state, the current destiny. Now, in the current Prarabdha, we are carrying the impact of our Purva Janma Samskaras, whatever good we've done. So, you will see different people are at different levels of being evolved in terms of achieving moksha and bhakti. How is it that there's a 4-year-old child who sings a bhajan, who chants a mantra with such amazing clarity and which already is bhakti soaked? How does that happen? That's because of the Purva Janma Samskara. So that cumulative effect that we experience in this prarabdha is what is called the prarabdha karma. And it can be shaped, and we'll talk about that. Something called kriyamana karma, agami karma, same thing, which is the action that we are currently doing, the karmas that we are currently doing and accumulating, which influence the prarabdha karma, so we can shape our destiny of this lifetime. That's the idea. Shaping our destiny of this lifetime and how it affects the sanchita karma. Because if we shape this particular lifetime, we're shaping the cumulative effect of sanchita as well. So that's the effect of the agami karma. So when people say this is my destiny, yes, this is your prarabdha, but you can also shape it. Bhagavan has empowered us. Through the Bhagavad Gita is empowering us to shape it. And that is why if you understand Dharma, SvaDharma, Buddhi Yoga, Karma Yoga, Dhyana and Bhakti, we can actually start to shape our prarabdha and our sanchita karma. Then the different way of looking at karmas, right? Nitya karma, daily duties, necessary action, and there are different nitya karmas for different varnas also, which have to be done, right? Naimittika karma is all the special rituals that happen, the yajnas that you do, special rituals in terms of naming ceremony, the simantam that we do, marriage rituals. There are lots of rituals which have to be done properly as a yajna. And many of these karmas are pretty much designed for universal good. So there will always be a purna ahuti, there will always be this contribution in all our rituals and homas or homams and yajnas that not only for us but also for the universal good. It always goes in concentric circles. So dharma comes into there as well, embedded, the principle of dharma, not just for ourselves. We could be doing graha pravesh, but the graha pravesh will start to emanate out as well. From our families to our extended families, to our community, to our country and so on. It just tends to go out. The way the mantras are chanted, the way the bhava is brought into play is always taken out. There's universal interest. Kamya karma is based on kama, right? Specific objectives. There are to attain certain goals. And Bhagavan says, absolutely, there is kamya karma you have to do. Kamya karma will not bring you to him, will not help you achieve moksha, but it needs to be done. And there are, it is perfectly legitimate and it's fine. Nishiddha karma is the prohibitive action. And that prohibitive action again covered by, in terms of what is not dharmic, what is not daivik, what is more asuric or rakshasa type behaviors. That's all nishiddha karma. And prayaschitta karma is how you take compensatory action. Bhagavan is very, very clear about one thing. He says you could be, today if you have listened to the Bhagavad Gita, it doesn't matter how you lived your life. You can still achieve moksha. You can still achieve your highest potential. So the ability to cleanse all your karmas and to commence the journey of prayaschitta is provided to us. Bhagavan is empowering us with this. Now again, let's extend the idea of karma because it's such a powerful concept. Right? The idea of nishkama karma versus sakama karma. So nishkama karma is selfless action. And as you evolve as a karma yogi, it's driven by desireless. So fewer and fewer of your actions are driven by desire. It is a mode towards sannyasa. Right? Tyaga is about sacrificing your desire for outcomes, and sannyasa is about sacrificing your desires altogether. And this all gets covered in the Gateway to the Gita in a lot of detail because they're incredibly fine ideas and concepts. But at one level, nishkama karma is selfless action. Sakama is selfish action. Now, other interesting thing is when you become aware of your karmas, you use your buddhi to observe your karmas, you will start to see, and Bhagavan's explained it, your karmas fall into three buckets, or three categories. There's jnata, which is the learning mode, karta, which is the action mode, and bhokta, which is the consumption mode. And he urges managing proportions, he urges moderation. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita in a chapter talks about diet. So Bhagavad Gita is complete, integrated, wholesome, holistic. Right? So even there, moderation is key. And I joke about it with my friends sometimes, that I say the only thing I like to do in extreme is moderation. I'm not always managing it, but my attempt is to try and maximize moderation. So managing your proportions of bhokta, which is consumption, is vital. You can have all the noble ideas and aspirations and desires, but if you don't manage the proportions, if you don't learn enough to help you act effectively, your action will be hollow, will be shallow. But if you learn too much, you don't act, what's the point? You've learned, great, but you've not converted that learning into meaningful action. It's wasted. So outcomes are not there. So hence this idea. But if you do too much bhokta, you don't learn enough, don't act enough, it muddies the day-to-day situation. So managing your karmic proportions is vital for you to be effective on a day-to-day basis, on an everyday basis. Then there's Shreyas versus Preyas. Fantastic concept comes through the Bhagavad Gita. Shreya is to do the right thing. You know, this idea that, oh, he's such a nice person, he's always polite, always courteous, has no enemies, is not necessarily a good thing, you know. So these are people who have oftentimes just done the easy thing and just sliding through life very, very casually, not trying to confront, not trying to correct things, quietly doing what they are supposed to do, operating in a self-centered mode. So what if you have not made enemies? Make a few enemies. It's okay to make some enemies if the enemies are not doing good. Demonstrate your capacity for the right action, doing the right thing over the easy thing. So again in our culture, and I find this a little more in India, coming from this ahimsa paramo dharma, the root cause for a lot of evil here, if I may say it in a very blunt way, is non-confrontational, not calling a spade, not acting for what you believe in. All this has the roots in, which is not what Bhagavan is saying. Bhagavan says you must act and do the right thing. Shreyas versus Preyas. This Ichcha Shakti idea is very powerful for kids, for all of us who are, for people who are students or people who are endeavoring high performance. This idea that you have to now balance. Ichcha Shakti is that will, desire, ambition, aspiration. Jnana Shakti is the knowledge that is required to fulfill that aspiration. If you want to be a great engineer, great doctor, great lawyer, great teacher, whatever you want to do, that ichcha is there, but if you don't have the right amount of jnana and you don't invest in generating that amount of jnana for yourself, you will not be able to achieve that ichcha. Likewise, along with the jnana, you kriya shakti, that action that is required, which is directed, using your jnana that is directed towards your ichcha. So all three things are required for right karmas to happen, for wholesome, effective karmas to happen. It's another way to look at karmas. Then the one more approach is looking at prayatnam kalam daivam. Prayatnam, when we look at an endeavor, many times I interact with people, even in terms of a mentor or advisor, and they're saying, they're frustrated that, especially entrepreneurs, that, we worked so hard for 3 years, 4 years, and we are not making any money, we're still not taking any salaries, I'm struggling, etc. And I tell them, there is prayatnam, the hard work you're doing, but the venture you have chosen to launch has its own time horizon. You can't decide to do a venture based on breakthrough innovation and expect to generate cash flows in year 2, for instance. So you have to ensure coherence between that prayatnam and the logical, rational, reasonable time horizon that matches that prayatnam. Then you have to remember that effort and time are two dimensions, but there is the idea of Bhagavan, Ishvara dimension. You're not completely in control. So, Daivam aspect is also to know when sometimes you need to let go, when sometimes it's perhaps not in your current scheme of things to achieve. And in my practical Bhagavad Gita program, I talk about how to interpret failures. It's not something we're going to cover here, but it gets discussed that in a level of detail in terms of karma. Then you have to rely on dharma for karma, testing actions against your SvaDharma. So you have to align dharma, SvaDharma, unlock your thinking through Buddhi Yoga, ensure your actions are aligned by leveraging your Buddhi, aligned with your SvaDharma and your Dharma. So that's a way to test. What is Karma Yoga? Karma is action. Karma Yoga is action which essentially is pure. It is not agitated by desires. It has kamya, it has desire, it has objectives, it has targets embedded in it. But you're not acting driven by the desire or desire for an outcome or fear of an outcome or greed for an outcome. While you may have objectives built into that particular karma. So Karma Yoga essentially is Bhagavan's formula for most people on the path of moksha. Because he says 99% of the people need to start with Karma Yoga and then through Buddhi Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, understand Jnana and then go into Vijnana. That's the kind of path that Bhagavan prescribes. So everybody has a path, but you have to see your Swabhava and then you have to tune it. And your Prarabdha and then you tune it accordingly. So Karma Yoga is action without expectations, right? Like I said, targets and objectives are there, but that expectation doesn't control the action. Because the expectation and all the mental, manas-oriented energies drive that karma is suboptimal. You don't act effectively because your agitation doesn't let your buddhi dominate. That's the essential problem with a lot of karma which is not anchored in Karma Yoga. But from the standpoint of Dharma, Karma Yoga is sattvic and it puts you on a path, and I talk about it down the line. It doesn't accumulate negativity and it basically generates merits. How does it generate merits when you do Karma Yoga versus just karma without Karma Yoga? All actions, karma performed as a karma yogi, destroys the baggage of vasanas. It's accumulating vasanas that essentially prohibits our progress towards moksha, which is the fourth pillar of Purushartha, if you remember, purpose of life. That clinging desires will basically hold us back. But as you release those clinging desires or agitated mind and you focus on pure action, it can be kamya karma also, like we said. And it should be more and more nishkama karma. You are moving, you are evolving in terms of your own growth. Both in Yoga Shastra terms, because you become a more powerful instrument, and in terms of Brahma Vidya. Both places, in both ways, are going up the ladder. So what happens is, I talked about Sanchita Karma already, right? Now when like Bhagavan says, today you start to become a Karma Yogi. The sooner you start to become a Karma Yogi, then automatically you are cleansing your Sanchita Karma and your Prarabdha. So that's the idea of how Karma Yoga is powerful from the standpoint of both Yoga Shastra as well as Brahma Vidya. Now, typically we have this issue about, big three, right? Greed, fear, uncertainty, dominant themes. So Purushartha urges us to control greed, balancing Dharma with Artha and Kama automatically controls greed. What SvaDharma does is, if a lot of the fear is generated because of uncertainty about what you're doing and how you're doing what you're doing, but if you align karma with SvaDharma, and if you know that you're on the right path, that fear will start to dissipate. It will reduce. So following a SvaDharma reduces fear. And acting through karma yoga, you overcome the agitation which is constantly worrying you, the nagging anxiety, nagging worry, what if you fail, that you need to succeed little desperately. All of those weakening energies are dissipated by the idea of karma yoga. So these three concepts drive us from a Yoga Shastra point of view into making progress, right? So SvaDharma, I give it like a framework or like a roadmap just to summarize, because we've now talked about Buddhi Yoga and Karma Yoga after SvaDharma. You're starting with the awareness of the gunas, understanding your Swabhava, looking at what is your Varna in terms of your Swabhava. You assess your ashrama, unique circumstances, constraints that you may have. You may think you're right to launch a venture, become an entrepreneur, but your family constraints and responsibilities and duties at that point in time are not aligning, not enabling, not supporting. Then you determine your SvaDharma, you align karma with SvaDharma, keep polishing your karma, start becoming more and more of a karma yogi. Dhyana yoga will allow that svadhyaya to learn and introspect, and we'll talk about Dhyana yoga, which is coming up now, will allow us to make progress in terms of understanding our SvaDharma, our dharma, and acting according to our SvaDharma through karma yoga, by using Buddhi Yoga very effectively. So now with this, so I've just talked about Karma Yoga, become an instrument. This is the highest level, becoming a Karma Yogi. Become an instrument for progress all around. So reduce your personal desire, keep your desires, and your desires will keep shifting. Now, it's like this. It's great to desire a sports car when you're in your 30s and 40s, but don't cling on to the same desires as your ashrama changes. Remodulate or change those desires. You must evolve, you must mature in your desires. That's what it means, Shed, reduce, and keep reducing that to get to a point where you keep it none or low, and then start to become more and more of a karma yogi. With that, we come to Dhyana yoga. I'm just going to do a time check. Okay, 7:55. So now we talked about how to think, how to act, how do you master yourself. Dhyana yoga provides that. Dhyana yoga is actually in chapter 6 is called Dhyana yoga. So in the first hexad of the Bhagavad Gita, 3 hexads, 18 chapters, the first 6 chapters, Dhyana yoga is the last chapter of the first hexad. It bridges the first 6 with the next 6. The next 6, chapters 7 to 12, are all about Bhakti Yoga. So Dhyana is a beautiful, see how Bhagavan delivers this in such a logical sequence. When he's teaching Dhyana, it's a huge enabler. Now you're already thinking, how do I change? How do I become better? How do I grow? How do I reach my higher potential? How do I put myself on a path for fulfilling my highest potential to Yoga Shastra? And then that's when he talks about dhyana as a technique, as an enabler to provide the transformation, without which is very hard for us to transform. And then dhyana takes us into bhakti yoga as well. So it delivers both, it operates both. So let's come to dhyana. Dhyana is evolving, is all about how you evolve and grow. How do you evolve? Firstly, you have to be aware of yourself, you have to be able to listen. Attentive listening, Shravanam, is fundamental. Then you have to be able to absorb that and introspect on that, and through that awareness, change, modulate your action. Right? So what happens is that Mananam will start to provide the changing direction of transformation and elevation of your performance towards your capacity. And then Svadhyaya is the study that's required. So participating in these programs, learning more, that fuels your mananam. New inputs are coming in, which you listen, new fuel is coming, new inputs are coming to add, that gives you a higher level of awareness, more depth in your thinking through Swadhyaya and Mananam. Then as you go deeper into your thought process, you leverage your buddhi more, quieten the manas, then Nididhyasana, contemplation, taking you into meditation, deeper absorption, so that you can convert some of these ideas that you now want to embrace into habits. And you make a deeper conviction, you have a deeper conviction, deeper commitment to the lasting change. So Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam with Swadhyaya as the enabling force is very, very vital for the path of Dhyana Yoga. So obviously becoming aware of your Swabhava, SvaDharma, like we said, all that helps. I mean, that's what you're trying to drive. And then Ahankar has to be managed as well. Evolve through the process of Karma Yoga. And we've brought in the idea of Dhyana. Now let's dive in. Now Bhagavan in chapter 6, he's like a yoga guru. I mean, we call him, Bhagavan is the Gita Acharya. As we say, he's the Acharya who has provided the Bhagavad Gita to us, but he's like a yoga guru. He's actually telling Arjuna and us how to do Dhyana. So he actually explains the specific steps. He says the seat, the asana should be a clean place. Hygiene and cleanliness is paramount. It's also covered in chapter 16. How did we become a dirty country? How did we allow this country to become dirty when cleanliness and hygiene is so deeply baked into Sanatana Dharma, right? So identifying the place, then you have to sit down. And Hatha Yoga allows you to sit down, develop the right posture for Dhyana. Then you have to turn to the mind, which is where Buddhi Yoga is helpful. The whole idea of Antakarana, taking the Buddhi as a sharp weapon and turning it to the mind, directing the mind. So you're controlling those wild horses, literally the metaphor of the horses and the charioteer, holding those horses. That's the effect of the Buddhi. Essentially holding the horses and directing and channelizing the horses. That's what Buddhi does, right? So the dynamic field of thoughts is now directed, becoming single-pointed. Then Bhagavan says, the mind is obviously being driven by the senses. The gunas, the senses are driving us. And the senses are covered in a lot of detail, again in the Gateway to the Gita program. Needs to be nudged, you have to make it calm. Physical, mental poise is required. You have to bring attention to the Agnya Chakra, which is located between the two eyes here, right at the base of the forehead. So Bhagavan is prescribing that we observe that Agnya Chakra has to be observed. And then you have to start thinking about him. You have to start thinking about Bhagavan. It's slowly you allow. When you think about Bhagavan, you're thinking about all his attributes. See, again it's integrated. If you go through the entire Bhagavad Gita, you will be left with an impression and an idea of Bhagavan that is so rich and so powerful, so compelling, so attractive that it's very easy for us to think about him when we're looking at meditation and we're doing dhyana. And slowly this buddhi, with its focus on the Agni Chakra, allows the mind to be occupied by Bhagavan, and then your ahankar is starting to get diminished. Because now you've externalized your antahakarana, the effect of the ahankar. You're not thinking about yourself and projecting yourself, and your ego starts to downplay and gets diminished. That starts to raise your level of consciousness, your awareness. And this practice provides that capacity to elevate your performance, to fulfill your capacity. That's the whole idea out here. So again, when Bhagavan explains this to Arjuna in chapter 16, Arjuna is objecting, and he says, but he says, he calls him Dhananjaya, he calls Bhagavan through, so many names, right? Dhananjaya is of course a name for Arjuna, but Arjuna himself turns to Bhagavan and calls him a variety of names. He calls him Purushottama in many places. And he addresses him and says, but the mind is restless, O Krishna. Here he says, O Krishna, in this particular place. How do I deal with this? It's a fundamental objection that I have to the protocol that you're prescribing to me to do dhyana. So the glorious tradition of our Shastras, Bhagavan acknowledges. He says, yeah, it's a practical problem. Then he says, and he calls him Mahabahu here, the mighty armed, the solution. So he says, the only way you can conquer this is you have to have the cycle of study. You have to control the mind's constant pursuit of outcomes and desires and objectives by toning that down, by harnessing it, by keeping it balanced, focused, bringing dharma into play in terms of artha and kama. And you have to bring dispassion through vairagya and abhyasa as the practice. This is the cycle, he says, which will help all of us. It becomes a habit, get better and better at what we do. When dhyana at its pinnacle, which is why dhyana is so valuable for both Yoga Shastra and for Brahma Vidya. Bhagavan says when you hit the pinnacle of dhyana, you will experience something called prashanta, serene, ananda, satchit ananda, we say, existence, consciousness, bliss comes. Dhyana is the path which takes jnana, which is knowledge, and converts that to vijnana, which is wisdom of Bhagavan and Paramatma. So we've heard this many phrases, nirvana, there's nirvikalpa samadhi, shantam, and all of these are used as well to what dhyana does for us. So that's the idea of dhyana. And now we come to bhakti yoga, which is the sixth pillar. I have already got to approximately an hour, so we have another 10 minutes to conclude. Now, like I said, bhakti yoga in the Gita is really 6 chapters. It's enormously rich and detailed, and it is very immersive, and it does many things to us. People say when they go through the program and then they also immerse themselves in the Bhagavad Gita, they read it and they pursue other gurus and so on. The second hexad starts to have an impression on us. It starts to change us, and the softer elements are more deeply imbibed as well, because Bhagavan here is talking about how you can realize yourself. It's now starting to go beyond how you perform to your highest potential, and how with Arjuna. So Arjuna is fired up in terms of doing a SvaDharma of the warrior leader, but then this concern that he has about killing his near and dear, his kith, and kin and so on. Bhagavan has to explain to him what death is all about, what life is all about, what creation is all about, what destruction is all about, and who he is. So the other way that the Bhagavad Gita can be thought about, you've heard the Mahavakya, Tat Tvam Asi, but in Sanskritam you can flip it around. You can say Tvam Tat Asi, it means the same. So the Bhagavad Gita, the first 6 chapters are Tvam, which is us. Next 6 chapters, which is Bhakti Yoga, Brahma Vidya, is Tat. What is that? And Asi is connecting the two, which happens from chapter 13 through 18. So merits of bhakti, what is bhakti? Upasana is basically, it expresses devotion to the Brahman, to Saguna Brahman, which is Paramatma, which is filled with wonderful gunas, and like we said, Shuddha Sattva. So individual beliefs will allow us to start thinking about bhakti and upasana through the process of bhakti yoga, and with the sattvic desire to achieve moksha. So the very fact that we are born as jivatmas with this prarabdha, with this antakarana, with the awareness of chitta, consciousness, and paramatma and atma, it really means that Bhagavan is giving us an opportunity to achieve moksha. For those who want it, for a mumukshu who wants to achieve moksha. Now upasana has to be understood, the concept of upasana. Upasana is worship with bhakti and devotion. Shraddha is the implicit faith that's required. So on the one hand, In Sanatana Dharma, in our Shastras and in our Upanishads and Vedanta and Gita, Bhagavan doesn't say, you must have full faith in me, no questions asked. Bhagavan says you must have the level of implicit faith, that Shraddha, which allows you to have an open mind, which then allows you to walk down the path of sadhana and do everything else, so that your Shraddha has the opportunity to get strengthened. But if you have a closed mind, then there's no opportunity to growth. There's no curiosity. It's a dead end. So let's not waste anybody's time. Now, Shraddha, very importantly, is the quality we need to identify with a guru. Now, in Arjuna's case, Bhagavan is his guru as well as Bhagavan. Right? In our case, Bhagavan's not here. We have other gurus. So we need to have Shraddha in the guru. But bhakti is reserved for Bhagavan. But today you see people have confused this. People have bhakti for their gurus, Shraddha and bhakti for their gurus, and they've forgotten that the bhakti has to be for Bhagavan. So you have all of these, situations where people go berserk, they go overboard with human beings, with gurus, and they have such crazy levels of bhakti that they lose sight of what they're trying to do in terms of that whole process of sadhana to begin with. So we must learn to distinguish between the Shraddha that's required for our Guru, which is required for our Shastras, and Bhakti, which is the reserved and the preserve of Bhagavan. Two, for us to realize who our true self is, and for moksha, to understand Paramatma, Brahman, Narayana. And very early on in chapter 6, the straddling chapter of Dhyana Yoga, coming into the next hexad, Bhagavan basically says, he already explained the idea of yogi to Arjuna, says, the one who worships me with full Shraddha, that has come through the process, the inner self merged, I consider that yogi as the greatest yogi. Because Arjuna is already probing the idea of yogi here. So Bhagavan's introduced the idea of Bhakti Yoga, just touching about it. Because he's also preparing Arjuna for the kind of information that he's about to share. Then he explains to Arjuna as it goes through chapter 7 and so on. Now with Bhakti Yoga, I'm deliberately talking about the chapters because they're very tightly connected with the second hexad. So far I was not alluding to so many chapters. Only to Dhyana I started to bring in the idea of a particular chapter. So Bhagavan says to Arjuna, open your mind, start to see my presence. Everywhere that you see, it is me. I am the material cause. I am the instrumental cause, Bhagavan is, and the supporting cause. Now, in our day-to-day, when we see one of the analogies taken is that of a pot. The mud is the material cause. The potter is the instrumental cause, the person who's making the pot. And the potter's wheel is the supporting cause. All the various implements and devices that are required to support. Bhagavan says, in the whole dimension of Prakriti, nature, it is me everywhere. I am the material cause, I am the instrumental cause, and I am the supporting cause. So that immanence, where Bhagavan's presence is embedded in everything, is what he is trying to get Arjuna to see. Because that is the way to think about bhakti, the way to think about who Bhagavan is, and to think about who you truly are, and your association with Paramatma. So the idea is that by doing this, slowly we move from jnana. We've got to a point where even with jnana we have understood Yoga Shastra, we've understood that there is a Paramatma, there is a Jivatma. Certain levels of jnana are there, but obviously that clarity in terms of who Bhagavan is and our association, that comes only through more and more dhyana as well. So even a jnana yogi needs to engage in dhyana to go to the point of vijnana as well. So Bhagavan has continued to explain that there's a Prakriti and Purusha. So this has got a lot of detail in the gateway to the Gita. This program is like a window to the Gita, like I say. Right? It's a narrow window, but in 1 hour something, I want to give all of you the full picture of what the Bhagavad Gita contains, so that in the Gateway to the Gita program, which covers all 18 chapters, all this will unfold in a lot of grandeur and detail as well. But here Bhagavan introduces the idea of Purusha and Prakriti. Prakriti, the lower Prakriti, there's a higher Prakriti, there's a Purusha. There are basic elements, base elements. Bhagavan identifies himself as, fire, earth, water, ether, space, mind. And then the more nuanced, subtle idea of their buddhi and ahankar. Bhagavan's there also. He's present everywhere. So the world of objects, the world of feelings, the world of ideas, it's all called Jagat. Collectively. And it's represented in the mind, the body, mind, intellect, BMI apparatus, as we've just understood here. So overlaid on these experiential worlds, on Jagat, is the higher Prakriti, which is the integrator. There's lower Prakriti, the material world. There's a higher Prakriti, principle of consciousness that touches our Chitta, and then there's Brahman, which is the aspect of Purusha. So Purusha, higher Prakriti, lower Prakriti. That's how the dimensions are covered. I'm touching on this very, very quickly because, like I said, this is just to give you a quick glimpse of how much is there really in Bhakti Yoga. Bhagavan is the invisible thread. He's connecting all these dimensions and all these experiences between lower Prakriti, higher Prakriti, as well as the Purusha. And it shows up in each entity's Dharma as well. So the fire that burns is God Bhagavan as the material cause, the instrumental cause, and the supporting cause. He is the flavor in the water. He is the Om in the Vedas. He is the light in the sun. Dharma of the sun is light and heat. That's Bhagavan. He identifies himself with that. The brilliance in the fire, fragrance of the earth, the austerity in austere. Like we said, the essence of a particular object is dharma of that particular thing. So austerity in austere is, Bhagavan says, that's also me. So he provides a lot of metaphors across one or two chapters so that, the idea of, it's very difficult for us to appreciate the immanence and the magnificence of Paramatma, Brahman and Bhagavan. So he provides various tools and various crutches for us to be able to appreciate it. So various metaphors to appreciate how he, Bhagavan, Shri Krishna, is the essence of all life. Then he describes himself as the eternal seed of all beings, the intelligence in the intelligent, the luminosity in luminous. Here's a brilliant thing he brings in, which is particularly interesting for all of us as mumukshus and as sadhakas, shall we say. He says that even that desire, if it's not opposed to dharma, even that you can identify with Bhagavan. That is just incredible. Because normally we would say all desires are not good, they're going to stop me from making progress. But Bhagavan says that desire, which is dharmic in nature, not opposed to dharma, you find me there as well. And that to me is just one of the most magnificent declarations that he is entreating to Arjuna and to all of us to desire dharma. Because by desiring dharma, we are automatically connecting ourselves with Bhagavan. Now Prakriti is visible as various gunas. That's how it emanates. There's a lot of discussion about Mahat and creation, which we won't have the time here. It is covered in a lot of detail in the Gateway to the Gita program. Purusha is beyond guna. It is gunatit. In Advaita, it is appreciated as gunatit. In Visishtadvaita and Dvaita, it is seen as Shuddha Sattva and identified as Saguna Brahman and Narayana. It's all connected as perfect purity. And Bhagavan is very clear that he is the avatar, he is Sri Narayana, and his word, Sri Krishna's word is Narayana's word. So he's connecting himself with Narayana as well. And that's where it slowly comes up even later in the when he displays himself in all his brilliant glory, which I will mention. I don't want to say the word earlier, I will mention it at the right time. So it takes multiple yoga paths to overcome the Maya. So Bhagavan talks about how you have to be able to associate and understand Prakriti, lower Prakriti, higher Prakriti and Purusha, and how you distinguish between each of this. and how you have to recognize what is Maya, distinguish between what is Maya, what is unreal, what is real, what is temporary, what is permanent. Once you understand the dynamics of all that, you can start to access Purusha. Then he talks about the kind of worshippers there are. 4 types of worshippers, he says, who seek me. The dissatisfied, seeker of knowledge, seeker of wealth, and the knowledgeable. There are these types of virtuous worshippers. Even if you do, all of them actually are doing bhakti, are going to temples, are praying, are doing upasana at different levels. He says there are all of these 4 types of worshippers. But I favor the one who's connected with me all the time, yukta, or in yoga with me at all times. The knowledgeable one is dearest to me. So he actually declares in chapter 7, because Arjuna is trying to understand who is dearest to him, how do you connect with Bhagavan? He explains this. Then there are, the types of people, there are 4 types of seekers who worship him. And then he talks about how they have to move on the path of vijnana from jnana. Distressed, like we said, people looking higher levels of artha, seekers of knowledge, mumukshus or sadhakas. Then comes this very, very powerful concept. I'm just setting it up for the ultimate concept called Sharanagati, which Bhagavan alludes to earlier. Prapatti also we say. Extraordinarily hard position where Sharanagati, you essentially surrender to Bhagavan, to Paramatma, to Narayana completely, and you allow that bhava to drive your karma. And the antakarana has to be able to connect, the buddhi has to allow the antakarana to experience that bhava of Sharanagati while being connected with worldly matters. So he says the one who surrenders among these seekers are obviously his favorite, right? So you have the jnani who's got the limitations of jnana, but then goes down the path to achieve vijnana through dhyana. And the other people are at various levels of being connected with the Maya and the material world, and they have to start to move on the path as well. Then he gives, in one particular area, he gives a quick instruction that says, if your final thought centers around me and nothing else, you will come to me. Which also indicates that over our day-to-day, our experience, if we keep Bhagavan in the middle of our antahakarana and our karma, then chances are our final thought will also center around him. So he provides that path, makes it easy. Throughout this hexad, every time Arjuna expresses the weakness that we all have as Arjunas and limitations, Bhagavan provides a way around. He provides a workaround so that nobody is excluded at any point in time in our lives to be able to achieve moksha. And then he also brings in and says, you fight with this mindset that if you are doing what you're doing for me, Krishna Arpanamastu, that with the firm conviction that if you do it for me, you will come to me, it will empower you in this fight, it will help you conquer all your fears and all the emotional turmoil that you're going through. That will I be accumulating sins? Arjuna has all these fears as well. So the idea is that, through upasana, engage, this is all relevant for us. Get into a contemplative mode, bring upasana with bhakti into our prayer, engage ourselves in SvaDharma, by identifying your svabhava and your station in life, do karma yoga, practice abhyasa, practice dhyana. All this is what you do to prepare ourselves to move to a path where we can really start to appreciate Bhagavan and Bhakti. Because it's often, like I said, depending on our Purva Janma Samskaras, we are all at different levels of Bhakti, levels of awareness of Bhagavan, Brahman, Paramatma. So even if you're at the lowest levels, you start off as a karma yogi, and then slowly through this idea of sadhana and swadhyaya and this capacity to do abhyasa and practice, start to put ourselves on a path. Then he says, I'm very easy to please. A leaf, he says actually a patram, also phalam, anything, argyam, water is sufficient. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, offer it to me as a sacrifice. So this idea, we say everything we do is Krishna Arpanamastu. So what happens is then we don't bind ourselves to a particular karma. Everything is being done ultimately as an offering to Bhagavan. So it starts to purify our actions, and we will also change the actions we pursue if we are going to offer it to Krishna. It's a very interesting dynamic that comes into play. And at one point, Bhagavan brings it together with the Vishwarupa. That's the word I didn't want to use before this, because this is where Arjuna starts to see Krishna as Narayana. He asks for a normal representation of Bhagavan so that he is not overwhelmed, and Bhagavan gives him that representation. And he starts to see Bhagavan as an embodiment of Dharma. Sees him as the timeless Purusha, Brahman, Paramatma. He's able to relate, when the Vishwarupa happens, he's able to really see a lot of the metaphysical ideas, a lot of the new concepts that Bhagavan is providing him in terms of Jnana Kanda. He starts to relate it. He's now starting to, physics meets metaphysics when Vishwarupa happens for Arjuna. He sees him as the substratum that's keeping it all together. So Bhagavan says you can achieve, as a path of Nirguna Brahman, you can achieve me, Akshara, Kaivalya Dham, Avyakta, manifest, unmanifest. You can choose the path of Nirguna Brahman, but you have to worship imperishable, indefinable, unmanifest, omnipresent, unthinkable, immovable, ever constant, eternal. That's how many yogis, gurus will talk about Nirguna Brahman. But remember, he says, it's qualified. You have to worship me as all of that and restrain your senses, be even-minded, be totally poised, always rejoicing in the welfare of everybody. Very difficult for an individual to achieve both, to be able to achieve moksha. Both these qualities, both these conditions are required to be able to achieve moksha through Nirguna Brahman. Or he says, you worship me as Bhagavan, right? And then he says, you think about Karma Yoga, get into Dhyana Yoga mode as a preparation, and then you start to come towards awareness of Prakriti and Purusha. And then once you start to realize that there's a difference, in 7th chapter he says, you are now getting the Vijnana side beyond Jnana. And then he says that all of these margas will lead us to Bhakti. It purifies the Antakarana. As you purify, Bhakti emerges by itself through this process. All Sampradayas will talk about the fact that Karma Yoga is a wonderful starting point for us to go down towards the path of Bhakti Yoga. Again, of course, in Visishtadvaita, the recognition clearly, Jiva recognizes its position clearly as a subordinate, dependent Sesha to Narayana, because that is what the Sampradaya proposes, and Dvaita also has a similar idea that we are subordinate to Bhagavan. Only there's a difference which is explained in a lot of detail in the Gateway to the Gita program between Visishtadvaita and Dvaita as well. Whereas Advaita has this idea of Saguna Brahman and Nirguna Brahman. Visishtadvaita and Dvaita do not prescribe Nirguna Brahman. They have Narayana and a Saguna and a Shuddha Sattva Brahman as the objective for moksha. In chapter 12, the idea of Bhakti Yoga essentially peaks, and then he says that he's provided all these options for people to be able to achieve moksha and to become one with him. So he says you have to choose based on where you are and what path is suitable for you. Because early on, Arjuna says, why can't I just go to the mountain and I'll pray, I'll become a yogi, I'll become a jnana yogi. He says, you cannot. You don't have that capacity, Arjuna, and he says that's true for most of us. We have to start with karma yoga and start purifying our vasanas, and then slowly do everything else that he's talked about for us to get to the path of moksha and to attain him. So this is where the 12th chapter also ends as the pinnacle of Bhakti Yoga. So with this, we are done with the presentation.